I see Lisa's calls sometimes and she's got someone on the phone like while they're driving.
Oh, yeah, that's a
How did they
lot.
do that?
Makes me
But at
nauseous.
least they tried, right? At least you're able to have a little bit of that FaceTime. So that's a tip I would give you if you're doing calls with clients. All right, so we are here today to go over our best tips and tricks for having your monthly reporting call with clients. This is something that a lot of our partners do in-house, and then some of the times when they ask us to manage clients, we get to do this for them. So we have Lisa, our client success manager here. We are going to be going
Oh,
over how she does everything. Hi, Lisa. And just kind of, the normal course of action that she follows when it comes to prepping, going through the call, diffusing clients if they have any issues, and then also going over just kind of how she wraps it all up at the end with her recaps. So, Lisa, we'll get started with how you prepare. What are some of your best tips for agency owners when it comes to preparing for these monthly reporting calls?
I think prep's huge. Prep's probably the biggest part of it because that just kind of leads to more success on the call. Obviously, if you're prepped appropriately, then you'll be ready to go for the call. For prep, what I usually do for SEO is I'll review their actual report because that's what we're going to be touching on for the most part. Look in the back end of analytics for any sort of good highlights that aren't included on the report, or if there's like a certain page that we worked on, we definitely want to make sure that if there was growth on that page that we can kind of equate work that we've done with actual results, because I think that really shows value. And the other part of it too is obviously asking your team. So asking the people that are more boots on the ground or that work, like a little bit more within the account, if they have any questions for them, if there's anything that's outstanding or needs approval on their side, because that's something that you can address on that call as well to kind of keep things cohesive, make sure that they know that we're all working together and we're all aware of what's going on with their accounts. And really just being overall just really, really familiar and confident, because confidence is key with these type of calls, because you have, well, I don't know if you've ever talked to someone and you talk to them on the phone and you could tell that they're nervous, and you don't
Yeah.
feel like you're in good hands if you're talking to someone who's nervous to tell you about results and things like that for something that they should be very familiar with.
Yeah. So one thing I'll add to this is it's kind of like when you're dealing with your small business owners, you always say, "Hey, put your best front desk people right on the phones because those are the people who give a first impression. Those are the people who are going to help, get more leads or whatever it is." In an agency, when you have account managers, at our agency, we have tiers of our account managers. So we have everything from our front end team all the way down to specialists. We have chosen at our agency to put our best people on the front lines who are very confident, who have a great background in digital marketing, who can essentially talk their way through everything because they know how to read analytics. They know how to understand strategy and how to strategize. I think that's really big too.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really good point is that you don't want to put your junior SEO on the phone with your biggest clients, or you don't want to put someone who's 3 days into their job and maybe well experienced into the front lines with your clients because they don't know your process. They really don't know your procedures yet. And they may say some things that they don't know they shouldn't say or don't elaborate on what you feel like they should. So I think it comes with a lot of training. Back when we used to have our whole team client facing and on the phone calls with all their clients, we did run through training. We did go through kind of role playing just to see, building confidence and just to see where they were currently at. I used to do this with some of our newer account strategists that were more in the junior level. So they knew how to do the job well on the back end, but they were usually a little bit more introverted as well. And we needed to get them excited to talk to clients. I remember we had a certain situation where we had one of our juniors who was super, super smart. She was incredibly smart with the SEO side, but she was very nervous on the phone. She was in a group call setting. So it wasn't just her, it was actually several of our team members. But we were in this big space with a technology group and a white label partner. And I remember them coming and pulling me to the side afterwards. And while I think she did a good job, it wasn't that she couldn't answer a question and it wasn't that she did anything wrong. Her voice was just kind of shaky because
Mhm.
she was just nervous. They pulled me aside after and were like, "Hey, it, she's great, but I do think this team is going to eat her alive if you don't. And I remember them saying that, and I was like, oh, that's a good point, because I think sometimes when we're in a virtual setting, especially, you almost feel like we're going to be a little bit more comfortable because we're in our homes. We're not like face to face with clients. Oddly enough, I find that I'm usually more comfortable face to face with clients because I can read them a little bit better.
Mhm.
But that was a situation where I learned, okay, it's going to take a certain level of like being polished to be able to really present well
Yeah,
and
polish. That's a
educate
perfect
well.
word for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So in terms of prep, it's getting everything set up. How do you set up your desktop before these calls? Because I think most agency owners are probably using Zoom at this point. How
Mhm.
do you kind of set everything up on your side?
I am recently moved to a double screen kind of gal, which is super
Ooh,
helpful
it is very helpful.
because it's a whole new ball game. You can show more data. It's kind of easier to navigate. I feel like a lot of times I'm assuming everyone probably listening to this is the same, but you have a million tabs open at all times. So it's nice to have one dedicated screen where you're not worried about your Slack messages popping up when you're in the middle of screen sharing or those types of things. And you can kind of just lay everything out specific to that client. So you can have their Google My Business, their analytics, the report itself, their keywords, all of that stuff up, excuse me, and ready to go. So that it's kind of seamless when you go through. And I think that the ease of that and having everything set up that way does again kind of work with the confidence because you're not shuffling, clicking around, trying to find the right thing. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't find it. Like,
Oh yeah.
and that too, it all really wraps with just being prepared, being prepped and ready to go, and having everything that you may possibly need right where you need it be 15 minutes before the call, because
Right.
that's going to make you feel more comfortable and lead to you sounding likely more confident.
Yeah, and sometimes you can actually take that moment to find some more good news, or something like that, right? Because your reporting dashboard that you're probably sharing with your client is a very high level look. It should have all of the KPIs that we're really trying to target. So that's the important thing, is to use your own reporting tool to showcase the work, to showcase the credit that you can take for generating all of the leads for your clients. But to dig a little bit deeper, now it depends on the client, I would say. Like Lisa, I'm sure you have clients who don't really care, right? It's all about leads, just make the phone ring. And then you have clients, I think, especially in like academic or law spaces, where they actually are very curious to understand how these things work, the behavior flow, like, hey, here's, this particular metric and here's what it means and here's what it leads to. Like they want to connect all of the pieces. So
Right.
having
It's
that
like,
up is
it's
a
a
great
story.
way to show them. Yeah.
Right. You're basically telling them a story of, hey,
Yeah.
we looked through the site, we set this strategy, we executed on the strategy, and now here are the results. Especially when you're in the beginning parts of the campaign and you can't really speak to, hey, we got 9 million calls, because you're maybe not at that point. Maybe you're still working on getting yourself ranked or something like that. But those little wins that will keep them throughout that kind of beginning starting phase where there's not huge increases in their goals, whether it's form fills, calls, things like that, whatever they consider to be a lead or however they get a lead in those first couple months. As we all know, it doesn't happen just like that, unfortunately. And finding those wins that you can actually connect with something that we did is, I think, helpful to kind of push them along so they continue to see the value until they can actually see the ROI.
Right. Specifically with SEO.
Right.
With our other services, PPC, Facebook ads, those usually ramp up pretty quickly. And then it's just a matter of dialing the audience. I think when you go into calls where it has to do with an ad spend or paid advertising, you take into account more that the discussion is going to be around refinement generally than it is going to be, here's where we're at in the process to get to lead gen. So for us, being that we're majorly an SEO agency, right? That's where most of our clients are. Yeah, I think it's education through the stepping stones through the course of action. I think also it's going to be, this is where we really can over deliver after we've under promised, right? There's that huge saying, under promise, over deliver. We're really big on that too. So we understand that internally, while we set an expectation for 6 to 9 months, we're usually like, obviously doing much better than that. However, there are going to be those clients that do take that long. And so that really saves you Never go into a reporting call expecting to like completely wow them. I think you should go in there with education and obviously the data behind you and understanding what matters most to them. That is what you're there for. It's to speak to what they care about. Sometimes even starting the call, and Lisa will get into her best practices real quick, but getting into those calls and saying, hey, what are you hoping to get the most out of today's call for? Is it just to go over your stats? Is it just to make sure we're on track? Is it to really talk about quality of leads? You cannot forget talking about, well, you may have brought them a bunch of leads. What do those leads look like? What did it actually mean for your bottom line? Part of these calls is holding your clients accountable for what they're doing with the foot traffic or with the calls that you're bringing them. So starting off the call, you may have your own agenda, but asking clients what they want to get out of it, I think is a really good way to also kind of set the stage so that you're listening and they know you're there to hear what they have to say.
Right. And especially with like clients that may be new, maybe this is your first time meeting with them, need to understand their level or where they're at with digital marketing. Do they understand it? What are their expectations? Just kind of understand where they're at so you can speak to them better. Brittany and I can have an obvious very different conversation than me and a client if we're going to talk about the same exact report. So being able to talk at a level that the client can understand is so important. That's something that to me, outside of like prepping, making sure you have your goal conversions all set up so you can speak to that. Like it's so important to be able to speak to the client at a level that they can understand, because they're not going to see the value that you're bringing if they have no idea what you're talking about. I even hear myself sometimes. I'm like, okay, I need to slow down. I'm like being a nerd about this, and you just have to be. That to me is one of the most, probably another very, very crucial thing is speaking to the client's level.
That's a huge point. And reading your clients, there's a level of psychology that goes into client management. Being able to read people is a great skill. So any of your account managers should have the ability to read people, and just try and understand what they're there for and speak to them. Like when we speak to our small business owners versus when we speak to our obviously agency owners or somebody more in an academic space, it is a totally different conversation. And it's not that we have to dumb things down. It's that we have to almost use like real world examples, I feel like, with our SMBs where they can relate it to something. Like when I relate sales, so we get new agency owners in here all the time, they've never sold digital marketing. And my reference to them is, how do you go out and sell a car when all you know how to do is ride a bike? That's like one of my favorite things to say because it resonates with them. They're like, oh, right. Because you wouldn't know the features. You wouldn't know how to do this. Like you wouldn't know how to actually do it. So it's the same thing in our world where we have to speak to a client almost in a way that they can relate it to something they do know. And then it's like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Specifically speaking about like user behavior and stuff of that nature.
Right.
Like, yeah, when you're browsing on your phone, like how do you scroll? How do you interact with websites? Like it's the same kind of conversation that way.
And it's so funny because even if you have like SMBs that are in the common industries, even like taking an exact example from like a mechanic and putting it in terms of a dentist is super helpful. Like for some reason, it just registers easier when you kind of like take yourself out of the equation.
I agree. Yeah. So what are some of your other helpful tips for agency owners?
I would say, and we talked about this a little bit, but I just want to come back to it, is to talk about the data that actually matters. There is, like I said, that period where you're going to be looking, I'll call it a little bit more granular at data to find those types of wins, like in the beginning of the campaign's SEO. But like if your client, it's just understanding their goals and making sure that basically every conversation or every like strategy session that you have is focused on their goals, because that's when things tend to get lost, I think, right? Like, well, our traffic decreased by 20%, but you got 50 more conversions. Like being able to focus on what matters to them and speaking to that often and all the time is super important. Making sure that event or conversion tracking is set up in Google Analytics is super important. Making sure that you're registering each of those so you have something to come with, and not only so you can show value, but from a strategy side of it, so that you can look back and say, okay, in March we did this, in April we did this, and we got more conversions. Being able to look at it that way is just another great set of data to include, obviously for the client, but also for the strategy. Um, and another good one too is kind of explaining the process of how it, and a lot of this is geared towards SEO, but a lot of that is like, it starts off with looking at your keywords and making sure that those increases. And once your keywords increase, then you start to get more visibility. And once you get more visibility, you get more leads. So speaking to where they're kind of at in that process is important. And I think that that helps them kind of be okay if they got the same amount of leads as they did the last month and you're in month 3, like, okay, but our keywords are increasing. So it's just like inevitable that the more keywords you're ranking for, the more leads you're going to get, right? Because you have
Right.
the more visibility.
Yeah. One big point, because you hit a little bit on like reiterate the goals, reiterate the goals. So I want to talk a little bit about diffusing clients when they feel like you haven't hit goals, and also the clients who change their goals. So a good example of this for us is a client that we had who wanted to rank #1 for wedding sparklers. For a long time, that was like her goal. But then every so often, as she'd start to see the ranking go up, suddenly we shifted to a different topic, which was what should matter, which is obviously her transactions. She was an e-commerce site. And so at one point I remember us sitting down, and our CEO led this conversation, and it was like, okay, what is our goal here? Is it to rank at #1, which is the only position she wanted, or is it to have an increase of transactions? What matters most to you? And she's like, well, of course, at the end of the day, it's transactions. So for the next year or so, every single time she would email in and say, hey, my ranking fell 2 spots or whatever it was, right? We would respond with, hey, let's look at your transactions year over year and where we're at. We always brought it back to that point.
Right.
And, eventually she did hit #1. She actually ranked above Amazon, which is super cool. And that was such a cool feat for our team. However, the course to get there was a constant reiteration of what matters most to you, what matters most to you. Because I think you'll have clients, and I don't necessarily know that it's to be difficult, but we see it, I think, in the industry, right, in marketing, as clients who want to constantly change their focus just to find something to like, they want it better. And I think that if you put yourself in their shoes, you'll see why. They want to be the best, they want to be on top, they want all these things, but just remind them. And I used to joke, we used to call it simmering her down. But it's like, just remind her of where we're at, where we've come from, which is also a very big thing. Always get a baseline report. Month 1, you need that baseline, even if it's 0 and you just established analytics, like collect 4 weeks of data, that's your baseline report. Always, always, always have that, because then you can really show the growth that you did over time. So anyway, back to get on track here. What else do you do when it comes to a client that essentially you can say, hey, you have this many leads. You go into the conversation thinking you're presenting great information. They come back at you with a complaint. They're unhappy. How do you tend to diffuse those situations and kind of refocus, or take the feedback and apply it to the team?
Yeah, I think it's a good mix of the two. I think a lot of what we talk about, especially with my role, is like being empathetic. And I think especially when you're talking to small business owners, they're in a frenzy, right? Like they've gotten a couple less conversions, or maybe they've only gotten a couple more when they wanted to get 10 more, and they're stressed. And that's what it comes from. It's not people just being jerks to be jerks. It comes from like a fear of like, oh my gosh, what's happening? So being able to kind of like diffuse the situation and speak to things like, okay, let's talk through a strategy right now. Like, what are we going to do to make this better for next time? What are things that we can start doing this month and for our task this month that are going to focus on this and affect this directly, right? And you talk about content topics, or you talk about maybe some conversion optimization on the website itself, or expanding, creating new city pages or service pages or things like that. And just creating a strategy where they feel comfortable that it's addressed, that you have something in place for the data that they want to see, and
Right.
a plan to get there as well.
Yeah. And I think from my side of things, which is an operations perspective, when I have seen these come through, so in our own agency, we have a process where every single call is documented. They're recorded, they're documented from our team. So Lisa actually sends a form in after every one of her calls that has a list of action items, so I can help bring any support or at a very high level, Michael and I can see any issues that may arise from calls that we've had and what she's actually come up with. The best part about having the right people in this position, the position that Lisa's in, client facing, is that you have someone who knows how to create the solutions, and that's not on you as the business owner. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is when you are managing a full team and they come to you with a problem and they just drop it in your lap. And it's like, okay, then you're left to solve every problem. That's not a good use of your time. Your time at the top should be impacting the bottom line. So having those moments where you can just know you've got someone in place who's like, okay, here was the issue, here's the solution, here's the next steps. That's huge. Just from an operations side of things, making sure that that's getting managed. A couple of key communication points that I wanted to just mention are using statements like I understand. Those are huge when you diffuse anybody. So again, kind of bringing it back to more of a psychological space when we read people. When someone's upset, they're upset because they're frustrated that they haven't been heard or that they were told something and expectations aren't in line. Our boss constantly says that, right? Expectations are out of line. That's when people get upset. And it's very true. And I think part of it is that they don't feel like you delivered. Part of it is that they don't feel heard. And the other part of it, I guess, is that they don't feel like you care. And because if we cared, right, we would be bringing the issues and saying, hey, we noticed this problem. We're going to fix it. And here's how we're going to do it. Even
That's
in
what I
our
was going to say
reporting,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
we've always said
Like a lot of times you'll be able to know, especially once you get to know the clients a little more, like after like second, third, fourth call, you'll know what they focus on and you'll be able to come like, okay, oh, my conversions are down. They're going to be ticked off. Like, and you can come with that plan, and that comes
yeah,
with the prepping too. And like the understanding of your own clients that you deal with.
huge. Yeah, huge. And I think it makes them feel, I mean, we're not there to necessarily pat them on the head and say, oh, it's okay, everything's going to be okay. We're there to say, hey, you've got a full team behind you looking at this, and we will make sure it gets addressed and we'll do our absolute best. At the end of the day, what can we all do? Our very best. And I think when you have a really good team behind you, that's what you'll get, even if it's outside of their control. I think the pandemic was a really big eye opener in the marketing space, that there will be certain things outside of our control that we cannot, we can write all the content in the world and do all of the things that we normally would do. And maybe there's just not as high of a demand, or maybe there's things stopping us. And, we as a generalist agency experienced and got to kind of see the fluctuations across industries with COVID. And so I think it really was a huge moment for Lisa to go in and be empathetic for all of these business owners who are experiencing this to some degree, and just say, I understand, and here's what we're going to do to help you. So I think that's a really good way to approach these calls. Don't just show up with the data and just expect that your client's going to be happy at that. You really have to show up and listen. And almost like sometimes when I used to do these calls, I used to feel like sometimes I was just listening to them vent about their business, and I was on the receiving end to listen and care for them. And, that's what they sometimes turn into. But
Right. Yeah, I agree.
that's how you also bond and you build a
Right.
relationship. And I think those moments are special, and they should be, I think they're there to help strengthen, your relationship with them. So
Right. Yeah. And like the hope is that you get to a point where you're just, well, probably not as upset as them, but you're upset that their leads are down too. And that comes with just building rapport and actually caring, which is, I think some agencies don't do, but actually caring about like, we gotta get them more conversions and really focusing on that and letting them feel that too. Like that's important. And I think that's where a lot of happiness comes from with clients, is them just them understanding and feeling that you're fighting for them. And that, like you were just saying, that there's a whole team behind you and we're all focused on the same goal. And yeah.
yeah, cool. So let's talk a little bit about how we recap, how we close it out, how we push things along for the next month until you meet with them again.
Outside of being a 2 monitor gal now, I also have a notebook, which is a 1900s way of doing it. But I just take like the actionable items, like the actionable takeaways, like we need to create this piece of content, or we need to reach out to Ronald as one of these notes. Like just take notes. And then before I hop off the call, I'll say, okay, here's what I have on my plate. Here's what's on your plate. I'll go through everything, make sure that nothing got missed. And then I'll say, okay, I'll send this over to you in email probably within the next 15 minutes. You hop off so it's fresh and you send out the recap and just include all those action items. Make sure that if there's anything you missed, just keep that communication open. Give them an ETA too. That's so important on the specific action item. So you're not just leaving them hanging or they don't know when it's going to be addressed. Making sure that they know when it's going to get done, I think is important. And then obviously the follow through on making sure it gets done at that point is crucial.
Right. I think those are all great points. I love that Lisa says she's like more of a pen and paper kind of person. When I was learning how to train this team, because we are virtual, I was like, you do what? Because for me, everything is on the computer. Like my notepad, I have one too. It's on the computer though. So I think the processes that you put in place to help you see visually what's happening, that was a big reason why we put that form in place for Lisa, because I know that she likes to write things down. It's very tangible. I get it. I do it with like my at-home to-do list, and it feels good to like cross things off. But you want a way to see like, okay, well, what's on Lisa's to-do list, right? As a manager, it helps you with bandwidth issues too. So you can always see like how big their to-do list is and did they follow up with this person? If I see on there that Lisa just submitted a call note she had with Ron and she needs to follow up by tomorrow, I can actually make that note now to go say, hey, Lisa, did you make sure this got done? And it's not to micromanage, but it does help, the team. Like if you have a good relationship with your team, they don't see those things as micromanagement. It's more of just like, oh, yep, no problem. Right. Because they see that you guys are trying to just make sure that everyone's successful. And I think there's a difference between a boss and a leader, I always say. And leaders will put things in place that help your team be successful. And I think when it comes to client calls, it's training, it's making sure that they feel confident, right person, right seat. So that was a huge thing with Lisa. And then making sure that you also give them the tools to be successful. She's got a great dashboard. She knows how to get into all of the spaces to show them good things, right? So it's supporting your team in a way that will help these presentations go a lot smoother. And then also just at your level, understanding how they're taking place. We record ours for a reason so that if any client ever comes back to me and is like, I just had an awful call, I can see that call. Or if Lisa's like, hey, you should watch this. This guy was like really crazy. Okay. Not that she's ever said that, but if I need to see it from either side, it is always really, really nice. So I recommend doing that if you're not currently doing that. I also think that, and this is probably just a tip because I experienced it not too long ago. If you're on a Zoom call, show your face. I was on a Zoom call with an agency who none of them actually showed their faces. And I was though, and so was the client and their client. And I was like, this is interesting. Be comfortable to communicate and connect in that way, because I do think it actually helped us. Once upon a time, we used to use Uber Conference years ago, and you just saw, if you wanted to screen share, but you just saw the little bubbles, like it was just voice communication. And I think when we moved to video, it actually made our relationships with clients a little bit better.
I 100% agree with that. It's like, it sounds so weird to say, and maybe I'll kick myself later for saying this, but you really do like I could see, like, not that clients are like, their eyes aren't lighting up, but they kind of are. Like, they're excited to see you. Like, it's like I have clients that I meet with every week, and it's the meeting's a good time. We get a lot done, and it's like, it would be so different if we weren't able to all see each other.
I agree. I think there's something that just humanizes both sides. And you just have a better relationship. I actually will ask people, hey, is your video working? Because I always show up with my video on. And sometimes I see Lisa's call sometimes and she's got someone on the phone like while they're driving.
That's a lot.
How did they do that? But at least they tried, right? At least you're able to have a little bit of that FaceTime. So that's a tip I would give you. If you're doing calls with clients and it's virtual, you're not going there in person, try and make it a video call. I think they go a lot smoother and you can read each other's emotions a lot better. Yeah, cool. Well, Lisa, any last tips for our agency owners on having those monthly reporting calls? Also, what is your tip on getting recurring calls set versus having your clients reach out and schedule when they want to? What's the best option?
I love recurring calls just for my own schedule and for the ease of everybody else. Initially I'll reach out, I'll say, hey, here's my Calendly, or give them some times I'm free. And then once I get on the call with them, I'll say, does this day and time typically work for you? Because let's just make this recur. Obviously, one of us at some point is probably not going to be able to make it at that day or time. So flexibility on both sides when it comes to that kind of stuff. But at least I think having something on the schedule helps you keep that client specifically top of mind. Like, okay, Friday I have a meeting with whoever. Today's Tuesday. I can start looking into stuff and prepping for that call already.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. All right. Well, Lisa and Brittany, signing off. We thought this was a nice little addition to our series, just helping you guys do a better job client facing. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye, guys.